My car rolled to a stop in front of Crown Heights, the restaurant where my mother-in-law's birthday party was being held. I smoothed out the black, form-fitting dress I had painstakingly chosen over the past week, a soft, ruched design that I hoped would finally win over the most difficult woman I had ever met. Miranda, my mother-in-law. Taking a deep breath, I adjusted my hair one last time. For 3 years since marrying Brian, I had done everything I could to be accepted by his family. But no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. Miranda, with all her high society airs, had always looked at me like I was a stain on her expensive silk blouse, one that no amount of scrubbing could ever remove. "I can do this," I whispered to myself, pushing open the restaurant doors and stepping into the elegant lobby. Soft classical music floated through the air, blending with the quiet hum of conversation from the already gathered guests. I made my way to the front desk, where a young woman in a sleek black suit stood holding a tablet. "Hi, I'm here for Miranda Westfield's birthday party," I said, trying to sound as confident as possible. She glanced at her tablet, then looked back at me with a cool, professional smile. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but your name isn't on the guest list." I blinked, trying to stay calm. "There must be a mistake. I'm Ellie Westfield, Brian Westfield's wife, Miranda's daughter-in-law." She checked again, then shook her head. "I'm sorry, ma'am, you're not listed. Without an invitation, I can't let you in." Before I could say another word, a familiar voice rang out behind me. "Is there a problem, Ellie?" I turned and saw Tiffany, my sister-in-law, standing there with a smirk playing on her perfectly made-up face. She wore a fiery red dress that screamed for attention, and judging by the gleam in her eyes, she was loving every second of this. "I'm not on the guest list," I said evenly, keeping my voice as steady as I could. Tiffany gave a little laugh. "Oh, really? How strange. Must be some kind of mix-up." But the way she looked at me, the smugness radiating off her, told me exactly what was going on. This wasn't a mistake. It was a setup. "Come on, I'll take you over to our table," Tiffany said sweetly. "Maybe Brian can clear it up." Her eyes swept over me in a way that made it crystal clear. She was savoring my humiliation. I followed her across the restaurant to a large table where the entire Westfield family was already seated. Brian looked up. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and then he quickly looked away. My heart sank. Even my husband wasn't going to stand up for me. "Brian, it looks like your wife's name isn't on the list," Tiffany said loudly, making sure the whole table could hear. Miranda looked up from her wine glass. She wore an elegant navy gown, glittering jewels dripping from her neck. Her eyes sparkled, not with kindness, but with amusement. "Oh, Ellie," she said in a syrupy voice, "how unfortunate. But you know this is a private event, only for close family members." The message was clear. After 3 years, she still didn't consider me one of them. "I understand," I said quietly, surprising even myself with how steady my voice sounded. I glanced at Brian, silently begging him to say something, but he just stared into his drink, refusing to meet my eyes. "Maybe it's best if you go home," Brian finally mumbled without looking at me. "I'll call a car for you." A dull ache throbbed in my chest, not because of Miranda's cruelty or Tiffany's smugness, but because of Brian's betrayal. The man I had loved and trusted had chosen to stay silent. I lifted my chin and met Miranda's gaze head-on. "That won't be necessary," I said. "I can manage just fine on my own." Then I turned to Tiffany, who was practically vibrating with glee. "But before I go," I said smoothly, "I have one small request." I caught the attention of a waiter nearby. "Excuse me, could you call the manager for me?" "The manager?" Tiffany snorted. "Ellie, don't make this more embarrassing than it already is." But I ignored her, standing there calmly, a faint smile playing on my lips. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, wondering what in the world I was about to do. Moments later, a door at the back of the room opened. A man in his 50s, dressed in an impeccable gray suit, walked briskly toward us. "Apologies for the delay," he said warmly. I'm Jonathan Reed, the General Manager of Crown Heights. How may I assist you?" His gaze swept across the room and then landed on me. Recognition lit up his face. "Mrs. Ellie, what an honor to have you here tonight." A hush fell over the table. I didn't even have to look around to feel the shock radiating from Miranda, from Tiffany, from everyone, especially at how the general manager was treating me. "Jonathan, it's a pleasure to meet you," I replied with a genuine smile. "I'm having a bit of trouble attending my mother-in-law's birthday party tonight." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "Trouble, Mrs. Ellie? Everything should be perfect for our shareholders." I could feel a ripple of shock sweep across the table. Tiffany's face changed so quickly I had to stifle a smile. Brian looked like he'd just swallowed a rock. And Miranda, well, she was trying hard to maintain a neutral expression, but her eyes had widened in disbelief. "It seems my name wasn't on the guest list," I said calmly, "even though it's my mother-in-law's birthday." Jonathan immediately turned to the woman at the front desk. "Sarah, how could this happen? Mrs. Ellie is a shareholder of our restaurant group and a strategic advisor to the board. She doesn't need to be on any guest list." Sarah flushed bright red. I'm sorry, Mr. Reed. I didn't know." "That's all right," I said gently. "She was just following the rules." Jonathan turned back to me. "I sincerely apologize for the inconvenience, Mrs. Ellie. We can arrange a table for you right away." I shook my head lightly. "Actually, I think it might be better if I sat separately tonight. It seems that's what the family prefers." I glanced over at Miranda, who was forcing a strained smile. "In that case," Jonathan said, "let me offer you our VIP room. It overlooks the garden and our chef will prepare a special menu just for you." "That's very kind of you," I replied. Tiffany suddenly spoke up, her voice stripped of the earlier sarcasm. I didn't know Ellie was a shareholder here." "Oh, Mrs. Ellie is not just an ordinary shareholder," Jonathan said, pride evident in his voice. "She helped us rebuild our entire business strategy and expand into 3 more states. Without her vision, Crown Heights wouldn't be the top fine dining establishment it is today." Miranda cleared her throat, clearly struggling to regain control. I didn't realize my daughter-in-law had such skills." "You're being modest, Mrs. Westfield," Jonathan chuckled. "I'm sure you're very proud to have such a talented woman in your family." Brian finally found his voice, sounding as if something was stuck in his throat. You never told me any of this." I met Brian's eyes. The man I once believed would always stand by me. "I tried to share a lot with you, Brian, but it always seemed like you were too busy listening to your mother, rather than your wife." Jonathan seemed to sense the tension. "Mrs. Ellie, let me show you to the VIP room. It's much quieter there." I nodded, then turned to look at the table one last time. "I hope you all have a lovely evening, and happy birthday, Mrs. Miranda." I saw Miranda's cold, piercing gaze soften into something resembling shock. The cruel words she once used to wound me had completely vanished from her lips. Jonathan led me through the elegant dining hall, down a private corridor, and opened the door to a small but beautifully decorated room. The window overlooked a garden sparkling with tiny fairy lights that looked like stars. A single table had been set with candles, flowers, and gleaming silverware. "Would you like to order now, or would you prefer a little time for yourself?" Jonathan asked. "I think I'll need a moment," I answered, "and maybe a glass of champagne would be perfect." "Of course." After Jonathan left, I sat down and gazed out at the luminous garden. A strange sense of peace wrapped around me. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone. The server arrived and filled my glass. I took a small sip, letting the bubbles dance across my tongue. A gentle warmth spread through my chest. In that quiet moment, memories from the past 3 years came flooding back. I remembered the day Brian introduced me to his family, the contemptuous look Miranda gave me, scrutinizing my every word and gesture. I remembered our engagement party when she had accidentally spilled red wine over my white dress. Our wedding day when she tried to convince Brian I wasn't good enough for him. I had heard it all, but stayed silent, believing that love could conquer everything. I thought of those tense Christmas dinners, the cutting remarks about how I dressed, how I spoke, even how I held a fork. And through it all, where was Brian? Sitting silently by her side, never once standing up for me. "She didn't mean it," he would say after every incident. "You're reading too much into it." Or worse, "You're just being too sensitive." I lived in silence, swallowing the pain, convincing myself our love was strong enough to survive. But tonight, sitting alone in this beautiful room, I finally saw the painful truth. I hadn't been fighting for our marriage. I had been fighting alone, against his entire family, including the man I married. Half my champagne was gone when I made my decision, a decision that had been living inside me for a long time, just waiting for the right moment to rise to the surface. I pulled out my phone, opened my messaging app, and sent a brief message to David Morgan, my friend from college and my lawyer. "Start the divorce process. I'm ready." Within seconds, my phone buzzed. "I'll prepare the papers. Ellie, are you sure?" I looked out at the shimmering garden again, feeling an almost sacred calm settle deep inside me. Then I typed back, "Never been more sure in my life." I set the phone down and took another sip of champagne. The chef sent over a small starter, perfectly seared scallops with a delicate anise glaze. The flavors melted on my tongue, but my mind was already elsewhere. I was planning my next steps. Tonight, when Brian came home, he would find an empty house. No more quiet, obedient Ellie enduring every injustice in silence. It was time to stand up for myself. After dinner, I didn't go home. Instead, I headed straight to the penthouse I had secretly purchased 6 months ago, my escape plan, carefully prepared for a day I always knew might come. I pulled out a suitcase from the closet, packed and ready. Inside were the essentials: important documents, some jewelry, and financial records Brian had no idea even existed. My phone buzzed. 17 missed calls from Brian. I shook my head and silenced the phone. This wasn't the time for conversation. I had more important things to handle. "Alyssa," I said into my phone, calling my personal assistant, "start prepping the ownership documents and restrict Brian's access to the company accounts." "Already in motion, Mrs. Ellie," Alyssa answered crisply. "Everything is ready, just as you instructed." I smiled. It was time for Brian, and his entire family, to learn that I was never the naive little lamb they thought I was. That night, I returned to the house, the grand mansion Brian loved to show off, bragging to anyone who'd listen about how he bought it with his natural business genius. The truth? I was the one who invested in his startup. I was the one who built his client network. And I was the one holding the 51% majority share. As I gathered the last of my personal belongings, I heard the garage door rumble open. Brian's car pulled in. I sat down calmly on the living room sofa, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. Brian stormed through the front door, his face a mix of anger and confusion. "You disappeared for 3 hours," he shouted. "Do you have any idea how worried I was? And what the hell happened at the restaurant? Why didn't you ever tell me you were a shareholder at Crown Heights?" I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, he felt like a stranger. Was this the man I had once loved? The man who sat silent while his mother humiliated me tonight? "There are a lot of things I never told you, Brian," I said evenly, "but more importantly, there are a lot of things I did tell you. You just never listened." I stood up, motioning to the packed suitcase by the door. "I'm leaving." Brian blinked, clearly struggling to process what he just heard. "Leaving? You can't just leave. We need to talk about tonight. My mom just..." "Enough." I cut him off sharply. I don't want to hear another excuse. For 3 years, I tried to be the perfect wife, the perfect daughter-in-law. I swallowed every cruel word, every condescending look. And what did you do, Brian? You sat there, silent, watching me fight alone. Brian stepped closer, his voice softening. Ellie, you know I love you. Love isn't words, Brian. It's actions. I pulled a folder from my bag. These are divorce papers. David will be in touch with your lawyer tomorrow morning. Brian's face twisted from confusion to fury in a flash. You think you can just walk out? You can't leave me, Ellie. I gave you everything. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Everything? Really, Brian? What exactly did you give me? He threw his hands out, gesturing wildly. This life, this house, my company, our social standing. I shook my head slowly, pulling another folder from my bag. You must be forgetting a few important details. This house, I said, tossing the papers onto the coffee table. Registered under Ellie Morgan, me. And these, I said, sliding over another stack, are the documents proving I own 51% of Westfield Investments, the company you love to brag about founding. Brian's face turned ghostly pale. That's not possible. You're lying. Where do you think the seed money came from, Brian? Where do you think your first clients came from? Who do you think wrote the business plan you pitched to investors? I watched the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Brian stumbled back, collapsing onto the sofa. You tricked me, he whispered. No, Brian. I loved you. I believed in you. And I thought you'd become the man I saw potential in. I was wrong. Suddenly, Brian shot up, rage flaring in his eyes. You won't get away with this. I'll fight you. I'll hire the best damn lawyer. Don't waste your breath, I said coldly. Everything is already documented. Our marriage license has a separate property clause. And by the way, I've already removed your name from all the joint bank accounts. Your credit cards will be frozen by midnight. He stood there, gaping like a fish pulled out of water, struggling to comprehend the ground crumbling beneath him. Why? He finally gasped. Why are you doing this? Because you had your chance, Brian. 3 years worth of chances. And tonight, when you sat there and watched your mother throw me out of her birthday party, I realized you were never going to change. I grabbed my suitcase and walked toward the door. You're nothing without me, Brian screamed after me, desperation thick in his voice. I paused at the doorway, turning to face him one last time. You're right, Brian. Now you'll have the chance to prove just how much nothing you really are. Goodbye. And with that, I stepped out, shutting the door behind me on everything we had ever been. Brian's voice shouting my name echoed faintly behind me, but I didn't look back. I didn't even hesitate. I climbed into my Porsche, a gift I had bought myself last year to celebrate Crown Heights' success, and drove away without a single tear, without a single regret. As I pulled onto the freeway, a strange, beautiful lightness settled over me. I had finally laid down the burden I'd carried for far too long. When I reached the penthouse, the city lights stretched out like a glittering carpet before me. I took the private elevator up, my phone buzzing in my purse. It was a message from Brian. You can't do this to me. I'm sorry. Can we please talk? I promise I'll change. I smiled sadly, then blocked his number and powered off my phone. Stepping out onto the balcony, I poured myself a glass of champagne. The cool night breeze kissed my skin, carrying away the last of the past. For the first time in 3 long years, I felt truly, gloriously free. 1 month later, I sat in my new office, high atop the Midtown skyline, gazing out over the city that stretched endlessly in every direction. Today, we had just closed the deal to expand Crown Heights to the West Coast, a project I had dreamed about for years, but never had the mental space to fully pursue. David, my lawyer and longtime friend, knocked lightly before stepping in. The divorce is finalized, he said, setting a folder on my desk. Congratulations, Ellie. You are officially a free woman. I smiled, picking up the folder. "Thank you, David. Not just for this, but for everything." He waved it off casually. "Don't worry, Brian didn't have much choice. You keep the penthouse, your 51% share in the company, and all of your personal assets. He's out of options." "How did he take it?" I asked, unable to hide my curiosity. David shrugged. "Like a kid who just lost his favorite toy, but his lawyer knew they didn't stand a chance. Your paperwork was bulletproof." I nodded and turned back toward the window, watching the late afternoon sun bounce off the skyscrapers, the city glowing golden, just like my new life. Vibrant, full of promise. "Any word from his family?" I asked. David snorted. "Believe it or not, Miranda tried reaching out to you. Seems she's finally realized what she lost." I shook my head with a small laugh. "Too late. I gave them more chances than they ever deserved." "Oh, and before I forget," David added, "want to hear the latest news about Brian's company?" I raised an eyebrow. I wasn't planning to, but sure. "His investors are pulling out. Turns out, without you running things behind the scenes, everything's falling apart. Brian's scrambling to sell off his 49% share, but nobody's interested. Not once they find out you still hold controlling interest." I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel regret. It was just the inevitable truth. Brian had never been a real businessman. He was just good at playing the part. "Tiffany called me," I admitted. "She was asking for a job." David burst out laughing. "Seriously? The same Tiffany who sneered at you at the restaurant? Tell me you're not actually considering it." "Of course not," I said, smiling slightly. "I just think it's funny how fast things can change." And it was true. Just 1 month ago, I had been the woman desperately trying to earn a place in a family that never truly wanted me. Now I was running my own empire, living in a penthouse, and, for the first time in my life, completely in charge of my own destiny. "Do you have any regrets?" David asked softly. I shook my head. "Not even a little. I only regret not doing it sooner." That night I returned to my penthouse. The New York skyline shimmered like a sea of stars below me. I poured a glass of champagne and stepped out onto the wide balcony. From here, the whole city lay at my feet, vibrant, alive, full of endless possibilities. My phone buzzed. An unknown number, but I knew exactly who it was. Brian had changed numbers, desperate to reach me after I blocked the old one. I shook my head and silenced the call. 3 years ago, I had believed Brian's love was all I needed. I had been willing to endure his family's cruelty, his silent complicity, anything, as long as I could hold on to that love. But I had been wrong. Real love means respect. It means protection. It means partnership. I took a slow sip of champagne, watching the city sparkle below. Being single hadn't been my plan, but it turned out to be the greatest gift I could have ever given myself. Not because I was alone, but because for the first time, I was free. I had found strength, not in someone else's love, but in the love I had for myself. In my ability to say no to anything that didn't honor my worth. In the courage to walk away, even when it meant leaving behind everything I once thought mattered. Happiness doesn't come from how much someone else loves you. It comes from how deeply you love yourself. I raised my glass to the night sky, making a silent vow. To every woman who stayed silent too long, to every soul who sacrificed too much, it's time we choose ourselves. And with a bright, fearless smile, I took a sip of champagne and welcomed the new life that was finally, truly mine. If you've ever been trapped in a toxic relationship or struggled to find your true worth, remember, it's never too late to start over. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to walk away and choose yourself. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe for more tales of strength, healing, and finding your voice. Leave a comment if you'd like to share your own journey, or if you know someone who needs to hear this. Hit like if you enjoyed the story and share it with someone who might need a reminder. You are stronger than you think. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.